Babe? Babe?
Identity is a narrative, something that allows us to understand how to react to the world, but trauma is when an experience is so painful and so contradicting to your sense of continuity that it can't be made sense of.
What did you do? I went for the head.
And if you stand back and look at Avengers Endgame on a mnemonic level, the story operates similarly to a metaphor for the process of dealing with trauma, because it's ultimately about people rehabilitating the present by reconciling with the past. It's one of the key reasons to why there's a 5-year jump within the story. Aside from giving Tony a 5-year-old child, it allows the story to emphasize the character's inability to make sense of the events of Infinity War. And this is all established within the opening minutes where we see Hawkeye turn around and then lose his wife and children. A core foundational pillar in Clint's identity is destroyed, completely punctured in this moment. He's a father with no family. He loses the story of his life.
You know what I've become.
Captain America and Iron Man's identities weren't destroyed from the experience of the snap, especially compared to Black Widow, or even more overtly, Thor. And this is because their trilogies were already all focused on how they react to identity-shattering experiences. They're both affected, sure, but Captain America's arc up to that point was all about the value of perseverance, while Iron Man's life was about the power of reinvention, so they both developed a high level of resilience towards traumatic experiences. Tony builds a new life for himself that is fulfilling beyond words, and Steve becomes an anchor for other people's griefs. And because of their capacity to negotiate with their pain, they are the ones who ultimately lead the Avengers to reconcile with this trauma, by providing the emotional imagination necessary for them to reassociate with their psychological injuries with newfounded meaning.
It was fun.
Look out!
Bruce.
Oh, that's right. Yes, go cry to your father, you little weasel.
Imagination is a crucial aspect of remembering because they are unavoidably and inseparably tied. As I quote from The Mnemonic Imagination by Emily Kitely and Michael Pickering for the 5th fucking time, there is no such line, but memory and imagination in themselves do not have one fixed mode or form. You need an imagination to envision your memories, and you need memories as psychological materials for your imagination to function.
Cool, ready to tell everybody who chopped Thanos' big head off.
And in the 5 years, the collective imagination of the victims of the post-snap world manifests itself in memorials of those turned to dust. The mood is in a state of mourning, and society is completely stagnant because any other collective cultural memories has no relevance as materials to envisioning anything outside of the collective suffering. Trauma destroys people's relationship with time because the loss of continuity means the absolute inability to imagine a future anymore. Which is what happens to Black Widow, who no longer has the one family that provided the much needed moral certainty in her life. All she has now is a jam sandwich.
Peanut butter sandwich.
While Clint gets a doofy haircut and a middle-aged man arm sleeve tattoo, Thor goes from being 2014's sexiest man alive to a homeless-looking Aussie dude. They're all characters that have hit a psychological dead end in their sense of self-concept because the imagination that has been used to fill in the puncture from the trauma is fundamentally inadequate. So the only foreseeable way to control the pain is to redefine and recontextualize the meaning of it. You have to painfully build a new narrative in order to organize a new identity that can manage the trauma. And in Endgame, this is wonderfully symbolized by the time heist, where the Avengers literally go back in time to bring useful materials that can create new meaning in the present. Because that is what a story is in relation to identity. It's a collection of memories that creates a sense of cohesion in the self. They literally use memory as a creative resource. It's such an awesome direction for the story. Getting the stones again also means encountering old temporal spaces that build new bridges and new continuities in self, but this also means reorientating just about everything in yourself.
That is America's ass.
You're not one of those beatniks, are you, Potts?
Boom!
What do you think is coursing through my veins right now?
Cheese whiz.
Each Infinity Stone comes at a cost, and that cost is losing whatever stability that survived in the characters after the trauma. Black Widow lost her secure moral grounding, and now she chooses to lose her life to complete her redemption. Steve lost his sense of patriotism, his best friend, but was still able to maintain a sense of continuity in terms of nurturing for others, to the point that he was willing to surrender his own identity to stand up for his friend in Civil War. But one glance at the woman he loves, that continuity suddenly becomes unfulfilling. Tony spends his entire life resenting his father, and even though some of his feelings were repaired in Iron Man 2, it's a pillar in his identity that has shaped him so much that when Tony had his own child, he immediately did the opposite of what his father did. He put the love of his own child above his work.
Tony, what are you doing back there? What is that? Put that back. Put it back where you got it from. Where's your mother? Maria!
We have a chance to bring her back, to bring everyone back. And you're telling me that you won't even...
That's right, Scott, I won't even.
Mommy told me to come and save you.
Good job. I'm saved.
While Thor returns to his mother and has enough of a sense of closure to heal. Even though Steve and Tony were originally the characters that were least affected by the snap, they actually experienced the most dramatic developments upon the process of repairing the self, because they encountered the biggest revelations that changes everything in their very beings. Therefore, this highlights that responding to trauma isn't about restoring the self to the way it was before. Healing demands a complete sense of reinvention, where old answers will be replaced by the discovery and construction of new ones. Regardless of if you like it or not, building a new continuity is the very cost of recovery.
Lose this again? I'm keeping it.
Every character ends in completely different places to where they thematically begin, which acts as a form of narrative reward for their willingness to rebuild themselves. Thor was about the drama from his political position. He lost his father, his mother, his home, his brother, his friends, his eye, and even his self-respect, all because of the weight of what he inherited, which ironically was the very responsibility and position he arrogantly demanded originally. But in the end, he surrenders his title and his political powers to Valkyrie. He's a different man now, a humble traveler rather than a monarch. And underneath Tony's constant state of reinvention is a man who didn't want to be his father, but he reconciles with this man finally, and actually for one moment realizes that it's okay to be like him. So in the end, Tony stops reinventing himself and chooses to sacrifice his life. He learns the same lesson that his father did, and is therefore, finally and truly, whole.
Girl would be nice. Less of a chance she'd turn out exactly like me.
What'd be so awful about that?
Let's just say that the greater good has rarely outweighed my own self-interest.
When Tony first said "I am Iron Man," it was because he couldn't help himself to take credit for his own personal recovery. He then told himself alone in private to securely affirm his transformation in Iron Man 3, and now he says it to Thanos. The futurist that has always been worried about the future confidently faces death by proudly embracing what his life has meant this whole time. And it's kind of amazing. Tony went from just being another wealthy dude who was selling weapons because it was a dependable business that gave him no stress, and now for one moment, he was a god. A new man that is complete. Steve started out as a patriot who refused to recognize himself, only others, and then in the end he abandons his responsibility for his own desires. Love fundamentally requires a level of selfishness, because when you say "I love you," you have to identify yourself first and then affirm someone else's value and importance to yourself. And that selfishness is something that Steve originally attacked Tony for.
I've seen the footage. The only thing you really fight for is yourself. You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you.
But here he is, also a new man, humbled enough to love himself. He chooses his own happiness above everyone else's, and is finally reborn. We become the monuments to our own memories, and that process is intimately painful because that continuity that you hold yourself to has to change directions. It is a fundamental aspect of being human that you have to give into the serendipitous nature of life, even if it means recovering from pain or helping others too. And that search for meaning is always there. And that's what's so cathartic about Endgame for me. We have conflicting themes that work so harmoniously because the writers, the actors, the directors, even the producer love these characters so much that they can't judge them. The Avengers are ultimately all just people, overcoming trauma by surrendering to serendipity, bravely and proudly.
You can rest now.
I think this is the magic of Avengers Endgame, even though it's kinda like continuity porn and has 50 million superheroes fighting a bold purple man and has lines like this.
As far as I'm concerned, that's America's ass.
It's still about something deeply intimate and relatable. It takes the nuances of dealing with identity and trauma and blows out into such massive, beautiful galactic proportions that the nuances of seeing how people deal with pain and hardship within their very fundamental sense of self becomes grandiose and beautiful. It's operatic. Every time I sit down and engage with the story, it feels like intimately embracing a dream of sorts. I need to stop using so many goddamn dramatic pauses in my fucking speech, Jesus Christ.